The late afternoon sun cast long, dancing shadows across the shimmering turquoise surface of the Silver Lake Estates pool. The air, thick with the scent of chlorine and sunscreen, hung heavy and still. Darius Rowland, chief of police, closed his eyes, the gentle lapping of the water against the pool's edge a soothing balm against the week's accumulated stress. He inhaled deeply, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest a silent meditation. This was his sanctuary, a stolen moment of peace in a life perpetually consumed by the demands of duty. He had purposely chosen this quiet Saturday to simply be. The chlorine scent hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the blooming jasmine that lined the wrought iron fence of the community pool. Darius could feel the damp heat clinging to his skin, a tangible reminder of the simmering tension that had yet to dissipate. Brenda, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, stood her ground. He noticed the way her fingers, tipped with a garish coral polish, dug into the thin fabric of her floral sundress. He'd seen that same gesture before, a rigid posture masking a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher. Fear? Uncertainty? Or something more insidious? "I live here," Darius repeated, his voice level, each word carefully enunciated. The absurdity of the situation gnawed at him, a slow burn of frustration that he fought to suppress. He was the chief of police, a man accustomed to command, to respect, to the weight of his words carrying unquestioned authority. Yet, here he was, on a sun-drenched afternoon, having to justify his presence at his own community pool. The irony wasn't lost on him, a bitter taste coating the back of his throat. "Oh, really?" Brenda's tone dripped with skepticism. Her eyes, magnified by oversized sunglasses, scanned him from head to toe, a blatant, dismissive appraisal that made his jaw clench. He knew what she was seeing. A tall, black man in swim trunks, not fitting her preconceived notion of what a resident in this upscale community should look like. Her internal monologue, he imagined, was a torrent of thinly veiled accusations. He doesn't belong here. He must have snuck in. The unspoken words hung in the air, thick and suffocating as the humid air. He forced himself to breathe, to maintain the preternatural calm he had cultivated over years on the force. "Yes, really," he replied, the faintest hint of steel threading his voice. "I own the place on Ashby Drive, number 14. Been there almost 2 years." The information, presented as plain fact, seemed to momentarily disarm her. The coral-tipped fingers relaxed their grip on her dress. For a fraction of a second, Darius allowed himself a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, reason would prevail. But the flicker of uncertainty in Brenda's eyes quickly hardened into something cold and resolute. "You rent here?" she asked, the word laced with disbelief, as if the idea of a black man owning property in this neighborhood was utterly preposterous. Darius felt a wave of weariness wash over him. The casual, almost unconscious, racism was more infuriating than outright hostility. It was the kind of prejudice that festered beneath the surface, disguised as polite concern, as neighborhood vigilance. He took a deep breath, the jasmine scent doing little to soothe the rising anger. He could feel the stares of other residents, some curious, some apprehensive, some openly hostile. He could practically hear the whispers, the silent judgments. Troublemaker, outsider, threat. "No, I own," he reiterated, emphasizing the word, his patience wearing thin. He thought about showing her his ID, about ending this ridiculous charade right then and there. But something held him back, a deep-seated need to expose the prejudice, to force her to confront her own bias. Brenda shifted her weight, the slight movement betraying her unease. The carefully constructed facade of polite concern began to crack. "Well, I haven't seen you around before," she said, her voice tight. Her eyes darted towards the gate, as if searching for confirmation of her suspicions. "Someone must have let you in. You should really get a key card." She delivered the last sentence with a condescending smile, a saccharine veneer over the underlying accusation. Darius fought the urge to sigh. This woman's insistence on clinging to her preconceived notions, her refusal to acknowledge the simple truth, was both exasperating and profoundly disheartening. He considered, for a fleeting moment, just walking away, ignoring her altogether. But then he saw Haley, the teenager who'd been sitting quietly by the pool, her phone pointed in their direction. He knew she was recording. He knew this incident, this small, seemingly insignificant confrontation, had the potential to become something more. "Someone did let me in," he said, keeping his voice even, aware that every word was being documented. The gate was malfunctioning. "It's not an issue." He hoped his calm demeanor, his measured words, would stand in stark contrast to Brenda's increasingly agitated state. But Brenda, seemingly oblivious to the growing audience, was not ready to concede. "Well, I'm just concerned about security," she persisted, her voice rising. He could see the fear, the distrust, swirling in her eyes. He recognized it, the primal instinct to protect one's territory, twisted and warped by prejudice. "I understand your concern," Darius replied, his tone deliberately neutral. He knew that arguing with her would only escalate the situation. He needed to defuse the tension, to expose the absurdity of her accusations without resorting to anger. "But I assure you, I am a resident, and I have every right to be here." He let the words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Brenda opened her mouth to retort, but before she could speak, a voice cut through the tense silence. "Brenda, leave him alone." It was Ty, another resident, a man Darius vaguely recognized from community meetings. He stood by the shallow end of the pool, his expression a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment. His intervention, however small, was a welcome reprieve, a tiny crack in the wall of prejudice. Brenda turned to Ty, her face flushed. "But she sputtered, then stopped, seemingly realizing the futility of her argument. The look on Ty's face, the quiet disapproval of the other residents, finally seemed to register. The carefully constructed facade of neighborhood watchfulness crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Darius could feel the weight of all the unseen eyes upon him, the silent judgment, the unspoken assumptions. He knew this incident, this small, seemingly insignificant confrontation, had become something more. It had become a symbol, a representation of the insidious nature of prejudice, of the constant struggle for belonging. And in the quiet hum of the afternoon, in the chlorine-scented air, Darius understood that this was just the beginning. The chlorine scent hung heavy in the air, a familiar sharpness that usually signaled relaxation. Today, though, it was laced with something else attention Darius could almost taste. The water, shimmering under the late afternoon sun, reflected the unease back at him in fractured, distorted patterns. He took another slow sip of water, the plastic bottle cool against his palm. He'd come seeking a moment of peace, a stolen hour between meetings, a chance to simply breathe and clear his head. Instead, he was navigating the murky waters of prejudice once again. Brenda's voice, brittle and high-pitched, sliced through the languid air. "Yes, I'm at the community pool. There's a man here suspicious." She tapped a manicured finger against the screen of her phone, the impatience radiating off her like heat from the pavement. Darius watched a ripple of awareness spread through the other pool-goers. Heads turned, eyes assessed, whispers began. He felt the weight of their gazes, the silent judgment before any words were spoken. A familiar coldness settled in his stomach. He'd been in similar situations countless times, the only black face in a sea of white. Each time, a small part of him hoped it would be different, that the automatic suspicion wouldn't arise. Each time, he was disappointed. "He says he lives here," Brenda continued, her voice laced with disbelief, "but he doesn't have a key card. He's probably in his 40s or 50s, dark skin, athletic build." Each descriptor felt like a brand, searing into his skin. He recognized the subtext, the coded language of fear and otherness. Her words were a cage, built not of bars but of assumptions. He closed his eyes briefly, taking a deep, steadying breath. Control. He needed to maintain control. This wasn't just about him. It was about something larger. It was about the insidious nature of prejudice, about the constant burden of proof placed on those who didn't fit the mold. He opened his eyes, catching the eye of a young girl, no older than 15, pointing a phone in his direction. Her face, devoid of judgment, was a small spark of hope in the gathering gloom. Perhaps this time, he thought there would be a witness, a silent record of the everyday biases that often went unseen, unheard. Brenda paced by the edge of the pool, her agitation a tangible force. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," she said, her voice a strained whisper, though loud enough for those nearby to hear. "But I just feel uncomfortable. You know how it is these days. The you know how it is hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning." He knew exactly what she meant. He'd lived it his entire life. A man, his skin pale against the bright blue of his swim trunks, detached himself from a group lounging under an umbrella. He approached Brenda cautiously, his brow furrowed. This was Ty, Darius remembered from the neighborhood watch meetings. Ty cleared his throat, his voice low. "Brenda, are you sure he's not a resident? There are a few new families who moved in recently." He glanced at Darius, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Brenda dismissed him with a wave of her hand. "I've lived here for 5 years, Ty. I know everyone, and I've never seen him before." Her tone suggested that her 5 years of residency granted her an encyclopedic knowledge of every face, every story within the gated walls. It was a claim to ownership, a declaration of who belonged and who didn't. Darius watched the interaction, the silent battle playing out between them. He saw the doubt flicker in Ty's eyes, the internal struggle between wanting to believe Brenda and the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He admired Ty's attempt to intervene, even if it was hesitant. It was a crack in the wall of silence, a small act of defiance against the prevailing narrative. He decided to speak, his voice calm and measured. "Ma'am, I understand your concern. I'm Darius Rowland. I do live here." He reached into his pocket, retrieving his driver's license, holding it out to her. He knew the futility of the gesture. It wouldn't erase the suspicion, the ingrained bias that had already taken root. But he needed to follow protocol, to maintain the composed facade that his position demanded. Brenda recoiled, as if his hand held a weapon instead of identification. "I don't need to see your ID," she stammered, her eyes darting around, seeking confirmation from the silent audience. She avoided his gaze, her face flushed. She'd painted herself into a corner, and the realization was beginning to dawn. The girl with the phone continued filming, her expression unwavering. Her silence was more potent than any commentary. It was a silent indictment, a testament to the power of observation. Darius felt a surge of weary resignation. This was the dance he'd performed so many times before. The constant need to prove, to explain, to justify his presence in spaces where he was deemed an anomaly. He knew that even if he showed her his ID, even if he produced a key card, the seed of doubt would remain. It was a deep-seated prejudice, nurtured by fear and reinforced by societal narratives. He tucked his license back into his pocket. The gesture felt heavy, laden with the weight of unspoken history. He looked at Brenda, her face a mask of discomfort and dawning realization. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that she wouldn't apologize. Not sincerely. She would find a way to justify her actions, to shift the blame, to maintain her sense of righteousness. He'd seen it happen before. The arrival of the security guard, his hand resting on his holster, marked the next act in the unfolding drama. The tension in the air thickened, palpable and suffocating. The chlorine scent hung heavy in the air, a sharp tang against the backdrop of sunscreen and heated concrete. Darius felt the sun beat down on his shoulders, the heat radiating through the thin cotton of his shirt. He held his gaze steady on Brenda, her face now a mask of confused indignation. The silence stretched, thick and palpable, broken only by the rhythmic splash of the pool filter and the distant laughter of children. Each second felt like an eternity, a tiny piece of glass added to the mosaic of his frustration. He'd come here for a swim, a moment of respite from the pressures of his job. Now this. He thought of his daughter, just learning to float in the shallow end of their own pool, her carefree laughter echoing in his memory. He wondered what she would think, what she would feel, seeing her father treated this way. He swallowed the bitter taste rising in his throat, the familiar sting of injustice. He thought about all the times he'd swallowed that bitterness, all the times he'd told himself it wasn't worth the fight. But something in Brenda's eyes, that unwavering certainty of her own rightness, ignited a different kind of fire within him. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something colder, sharper, a weary resolve. My name is Darius Rowland. I'm a resident. His voice was even, calm, a deliberate counterpoint to the rising tension crackling in the air. He could feel the weight of the gazes around him, the silent audience holding their breath. Brenda's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She opened her mouth to speak, then hesitated. Something in his demeanor, something she couldn't quite place, seemed to give her pause. Doubt flickered in her eyes, a tiny crack in the facade of her certainty. He saw it, that flicker, and it fueled him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the times he'd been judged, all the times his presence had been questioned, all the times he'd been made to feel like he didn't belong. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of his badge. He pulled it out slowly, deliberately, the sunlight glinting off its surface. The silence deepened, the air thick with anticipation. He held it up, letting the badge speak for itself. The golden emblem, the embossed lettering, a symbol of authority, a symbol of the law he was sworn to uphold. He watched as Brenda's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. The color drained from her face, leaving her a stark white against the vibrant blue of the pool. The unwavering certainty in her eyes crumbled, replaced by a dawning realization. He could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the frantic scramble to reconcile the image she had constructed of him with the reality presented before her. The air crackled with the unspoken. Brenda remained frozen, her mouth slightly agape. The carefully constructed narrative she'd built in her mind, the intruder, the outsider, the threat shattered into a million pieces. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant chirping of cicadas and the gentle lapping of the pool water against the tiled edge. The woman's hand, still clutching her phone, trembled slightly. Her carefully manicured nails, painted a summery coral, seemed incongruous against the pallor of her skin. She swallowed hard, the click of her throat echoing in the sudden stillness. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the subtle change in the collective gaze of the onlookers. The suspicion, the judgment, slowly melting away, replaced by a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and a dawning understanding. Ty, who had remained silent until now, let out a low whistle. His eyes, previously narrowed in skepticism, now widened in surprise. He glanced at Brenda, then back at Darius, a slow grin spreading across his face. He shifted his weight, a subtle movement that spoke volumes. He was no longer a neutral observer. He was a witness. He cleared his throat, the sound breaking the spell that had fallen over the small gathering. "Well, Brenda," he drawled, his voice laced with a newfound confidence. "Looks like you've met our chief." Haley, the teenager who had been filming the entire exchange, lowered her phone slightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fascination. Her fingers, still hovering over the record button, paused. She glanced from Darius to Brenda, her expression shifting from detached observation to something akin to awe. The scene unfolding before her was more dramatic than any reality show she'd ever watched. This was real life, raw and unscripted, and she had a front row seat. She pressed the record button again, capturing the stunned silence, the shifting expressions, the palpable tension hanging in the air. This video, she knew, was going to be big. Darius remained impassive, his expression carefully neutral. He felt a strange detachment from the scene, as if he were watching it unfold from a distance. The heat of the sun, the smell of chlorine, the murmuring voices around him, all seemed to fade into the background. He focused on Brenda's face, watching the play of emotions flicker across her features: disbelief, shame, a dawning fear. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of triumph, only a profound weariness. He had proven his point, but at what cost? He thought of his daughter again, her innocent face, her unwavering trust in the world. He wondered how long that innocence would last, how long before she too encountered the same prejudice, the same assumptions, the same casual cruelty. He tucked his badge back into his pocket, the cool metal a small comfort against his skin. He looked at Brenda, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Now," he said, his voice calm and measured, "if you'll excuse me, I believe I was about to go for a swim." He turned and walked towards the pool, leaving Brenda standing there, speechless and shaken, in the center of the gathering crowd. The ripple of his movement seemed to break the spell that had held everyone captive. Whispers erupted, followed by murmurs, then a low hum of conversation. The air, thick with tension moments before, now buzzed with a different kind of energy. The energy of revelation, of reckoning, of change. The chlorine scent hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of tension that had settled over the pool area. Brenda's breath hitched, shallow and rapid, like a trapped bird fluttering against its cage. She could feel the weight of gazes, a silent judgment pressing down on her. The security guard, still clutching his radio, looked like he wished the earth would swallow him whole. Darius Rowland, the man she had so readily accused, stood with an unnerving stillness, his posture radiating an authority that belied the casualness of his attire. He hadn't moved, hadn't even flinched. Brenda felt a flicker of unease. Had she made a mistake? The thought, small and hesitant, pricked at the edges of her certainty. A shadow fell across the shimmering turquoise water. Ty, another resident Brenda vaguely recognized from community meetings, stepped forward. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and something akin to disgust. He looked at Brenda, his gaze sharp enough to draw blood. "You saw a black man sitting by the pool and decided he didn't belong, that's what this was." Brenda recoiled as if struck. Ty's words, blunt and accusatory, echoed the unspoken judgment she felt radiating from the gathering crowd. Her carefully constructed world of order and predictability, a world where she knew her place and everyone else's, seemed to crumble around her. How dare he? This outsider, questioning her motives, her judgment. "I was just concerned," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. He didn't have a key card. The lie felt like ash in her mouth. She had seen countless residents enter without swiping, herself included. It wasn't about the key card. It was about the unfamiliar face, the skin that didn't match the tanned uniformity of the Oakhaven elite. But admitting that, voicing the insidious prejudice that had spurred her to action, felt like admitting to a shameful secret. Ty scoffed. Concerned? Or just uncomfortable? His voice, though calm, carried an undercurrent of steel. He gestured towards Darius, a subtle but pointed movement. "This man is Chief Rowland. He could buy this entire community and not even blink." The words landed like a bomb. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, the whispers carrying a mixture of shock and something else, something that sounded suspiciously like amusement. Brenda's blood ran cold. Chief Rowland? The chief of police? Here? At Oakhaven? It couldn't be. She searched his face, seeking a denial, a flicker of amusement, anything to dispel the horrifying realization that was dawning on her. Darius's expression remained unchanged, a mask of polite indifference. He looked past Brenda, his gaze sweeping over the assembled residents. "I apologize for the inconvenience," he said, his voice smooth and resonant, carrying the weight of his position. "I simply wanted to enjoy the facilities my taxes help maintain." The faintest hint of irony colored his tone, a delicate barb hidden beneath a veneer of civility. Brenda felt her face flush with shame. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the concrete, and become one with the meticulously manicured landscaping. The whispers intensified, the amusement now tinged with something harsher, something that felt like contempt. She had made a fool of herself, a spectacular, public fool. And worse, she had exposed the ugliness that she had kept carefully hidden beneath a veneer of polite respectability. Internally, a storm raged. Humiliation warred with a desperate need to justify herself. It was a mistake. Anyone could have made it. He didn't look like the chief of police. The thought remained unfinished, a dark, unspoken prejudice hanging in the air. Ty's voice, low and steady, cut through the cacophony of her thoughts. Perhaps next time, Brenda, you'll think twice before jumping to conclusions. He didn't raise his voice, yet his words carried the force of a thunderclap. The crowd, now emboldened, began to murmur their agreement. Brenda felt a wave of nausea wash over her. This was a nightmare, a public dissection of her deepest, ugliest biases. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to defend herself against the accusations that hung heavy in the air. But the words wouldn't come. She was trapped, pinned beneath the weight of her own prejudice, exposed for all the world to see. A small, insistent buzzing sound broke through the haze of her humiliation. Brenda looked up, her gaze drawn to a teenage girl standing near the edge of the crowd. The girl, Haley, held her phone aloft, the screen glowing brightly. She was recording. Brenda's breath hitched. This was going viral. This moment of shame, this public execution of her character, would be preserved, dissected, and replayed ad nauseum. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through her veins. Darius, seemingly oblivious to Brenda's inner turmoil, turned to address the crowd. His voice, calm and measured, cut through the buzzing whispers. "This isn't just about me," he said, his gaze sweeping over the faces surrounding him. "This is about the assumptions we make, the biases we hold, and the impact they have on others." He paused, letting his words sink in. It's time we all took a long, hard look in the mirror and asked ourselves, what kind of community do we want to be? His words resonated with a power that silenced the crowd. The buzzing of Haley's phone seemed to amplify the sudden stillness, a testament to the weight of the moment. Brenda, trapped in the eye of the storm, felt a flicker of something akin to understanding. This wasn't just about her. This was about something bigger, something deeper, something that touched the very fabric of their community. And she, in her blind adherence to prejudice, had ripped a hole in that fabric, exposing the raw, frayed edges for all the world to see. The muted glow of the laptop screen painted Darius's face in shifting shades of blue and gray. The digital storm raged outside his window, a whirlwind of comments, shares, and retweets swirling around the video Haley had posted. He clicked play again. The pixelated version of himself, impossibly calm, stood juxtaposed against the shrill accusations of a woman whose name he now knew was Brenda. Brenda. He rolled the name around in his mind, a bland, commonplace name that belied the venom it had spewed. The video was a stark reminder, not of the incident itself, the memory of which was etched acidly in his memory, but of the casual cruelty that permeated the air he breathed, often unseen, like carbon monoxide. He'd spent a lifetime navigating these subtle currents of prejudice, the constant undertow of suspicion, the unspoken assumptions that clung to him like a second skin. This time, however, it had been captured, dissected, and broadcast for the world to see. A small, bitter victory. Is a victory? He wondered, the thought a jagged splinter in his mind. He watched his own digital reflection, his controlled demeanor a learned response, a shield honed over years of facing down both overt racism and its insidious, more pervasive cousin. He scrubbed a hand down his face, the rasp of stubble against his palm a small, grounding sensation. The rising sun cast long, skeletal shadows across his living room, stretching the familiar furniture into distorted shapes. He hadn't slept. Not really. He'd spent the hours between night and morning adrift in a sea of online commentary, watching the incident refracted through the prism of social media, each comment a shard of glass reflecting a different angle of the same ugly truth. Some saw him as a symbol of resilience, others a victim, and still others, shrouded in anonymous avatars, echoed Brenda's suspicion. The cacophony of voices was deafening, each one clamoring for attention, for validation, for the last word. The doorbell chimed, a jarring intrusion into the silent tension of the morning. He felt a flicker of annoyance, a reluctance to face the world outside, the world that held both Brenda and those who, even now, were typing out their justifications for her behavior. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire previous day, he opened it. Brenda stood on his doorstep, clutching a handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. She was smaller than he remembered, somehow diminished, the fiery defiance that had crackled around her at the pool replaced by a palpable tremor of unease. The morning light caught the faint lines etched around her eyes, lines that spoke of sleepless nights and, perhaps, a dawning realization. Her carefully styled hair was slightly disheveled, a subtle crack in the facade of composure she had so desperately tried to maintain the day before. He noted the details, the way her lips trembled, the rapid flutter of her pulse visible in the hollow of her throat, the subtle clenching and unclenching of her fists. He felt a surge of something complex, a mixture of anger and a weary kind of pity. He wondered if this woman, standing before him with a face etched in remorse, truly understood the depth of the wound she had inflicted. "Chief Roland," she began, her voice a thin thread of sound, barely audible above the chirping of birds in the nearby trees. "I wanted to come by in person. I messed up big time." Her words hung in the air, fragile and inadequate. He watched her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic. He thought of the video, of the casual disdain in her voice as she had questioned his right to exist in that space. He thought of the countless times he'd faced similar situations, the accumulated weight of microaggressions and outright prejudice that he carried like an invisible burden. "You knew it then. You just didn't care," he said, his voice low and even, each word a carefully placed stone in the growing chasm between them. Brenda flinched as if struck. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, met his. The carefully constructed mask of composure finally crumbled, revealing a raw vulnerability that surprised him. He saw a flicker of genuine shame, a glimmer of understanding in their depths. I mean, she stumbled over her words, the practiced fluency of her usual speech deserting her. She looked down at her hands, twisting the strap of her handbag. "I see it now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. In the video, the things I said, he remained silent, waiting. He needed to hear it, not the rehearsed apology of someone seeking to escape the consequences of their actions, but a genuine acknowledgement of the underlying prejudice that had fueled her behavior. She lifted her head, her gaze meeting his with a raw honesty that was both unsettling and strangely compelling. "I judged you," she admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. "I saw your skin color, and I made assumptions. I didn't see you. I saw a threat. And I'm so ashamed." Her words, clumsy and imperfect, hung in the air between them. Darius felt a shift within him, a subtle easing of the tension that had coiled tight in his chest. He saw a flicker of something akin to hope, a fragile possibility of understanding, of change. He knew the road ahead was long, that this single apology wouldn't erase the deep-seated prejudices that plagued their community, but it was a start. It was a crack in the wall of ignorance, a sliver of light in the darkness. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Darius's living room, painting the walls in hues of amber and gold. Dust motes danced in the light beams, a silent ballet against the quiet hum of the air conditioning. He sat on his charcoal gray sofa, the plush cushions sinking beneath his weight. His hands were clasped loosely in his lap, his posture relaxed, yet an underlying tension tightened his shoulders. He watched Brenda, perched stiffly on the edge of the armchair opposite him, her face a mask of carefully constructed remorse. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. He could almost feel the weight of her unspoken words, the swirling eddy of justification and regret warring within her. "I didn't think about it," she finally stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, darted around the room, avoiding his gaze. He noted the way her fingers twisted in her lap, the nervous twitch of her jaw. Her carefully composed facade was beginning to crack. It just fell off. He studied her, his expression inscrutable. Fell off, he thought. Such a simple phrase to encapsulate such a complex and insidious prejudice. How many times had those 3 words been used to justify suspicion, to validate fear, to rationalize discrimination? A lifetime of ingrained biases condensed into a fleeting, almost instinctive reaction. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that she believed her apology was sincere, that she truly thought she was simply protecting her community. And that was perhaps the most disturbing part of it all. "You didn't think about it," he echoed, his voice low and steady. "Because you've never had to." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a brief flash of defiance quickly masked by a renewed wave of guilt. He continued, letting his words sink in. "You've never had to question whether your presence is welcome, whether your intentions will be misinterpreted, whether your very existence is perceived as a threat." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze dropping to her lap. He could almost feel the gears turning in her mind, grappling with the unfamiliar territory of self-reflection. He had chosen his words carefully, aiming not to accuse, but to illuminate, to peel back the layers of ingrained prejudice and expose the raw nerve beneath. He knew this wasn't a conversation that would be won with anger or accusations. It required a different approach, a gentle yet firm dismantling of the assumptions she had held for so long. Brenda's internal monologue was a chaotic storm. Shame wrestled with defensiveness. Regret battled with the remnants of her ingrained biases. She had rehearsed this apology countless times in her head on the drive over, each iteration more polished, more contrite. Yet, faced with the quiet intensity of his gaze, her carefully crafted words felt hollow, insufficient. She hadn't anticipated this. She had expected anger, perhaps even outrage. But this calm, controlled dissection of her actions was far more unsettling. It was as if he was holding a mirror up to her soul, forcing her to confront the ugliness she had tried so hard to ignore. She wanted to explain, to justify her actions, to tell him that she wasn't racist, that she had black friends, that she donated to charities. But the words caught in her throat, choked by the realization that none of those things mattered. None of them erased the fact that she had called security on a black man simply for being at the pool. A man who, she now knew, was the chief of police. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. The air in the room crackled with unspoken tension. The rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to amplify the silence, each tick a reminder of the passing time, the weight of the moment. Darius watched her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't interested in her apologies. He wanted something more, something deeper. He wanted understanding. He wanted change. He leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now, almost conversational. "Do you understand why I'm here, Brenda? Why I invited you to my home?" She looked up, her eyes searching his. She shook her head slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. He sighed, a quiet, weary sound. "I'm not here to berate you, Brenda. I'm here because I want you to understand. To truly understand the impact of your actions, the weight of your assumptions." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "This isn't about you, Brenda. It's about something much bigger than you, bigger than me, bigger than this incident at the pool." He gestured vaguely towards the window, towards the world outside, the world that was watching, waiting, judging. "This is about a system built on prejudice and fear, a system that allows people to make assumptions based on the color of someone's skin. And until we dismantle that system, until we confront the biases within ourselves and within our communities, these incidents will continue to happen." Brenda listened, her mind reeling. The conversation had shifted, subtly yet profoundly. It was no longer about her guilt, her apology. It was about something much larger, something that extended far beyond the confines of her gated community, far beyond the incident at the pool. It was about a societal illness, a deep-seated prejudice that she had been complicit in perpetuating. A wave of nausea washed over her. The carefully constructed walls of her defensiveness began to crumble, replaced by a dawning awareness of the profound impact of her actions. The shame was still there, but now it was mingled with something else. A flicker of understanding, a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this uncomfortable, agonizing conversation could be the catalyst for something more, something better. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. The air grew heavy with unspoken emotions, the weight of the past, and the uncertain promise of the future. The silence stretched, no longer thick with tension, but pregnant with possibility. The chlorine scent hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of yesterday's tension. The pool shimmered, an undisturbed turquoise canvas reflecting the cloudless Wednesday morning sky. Darius stood at the edge, the cool tiles a soothing pressure against the soles of his bare feet. He held his phone horizontally, the red recording light a tiny, pulsating eye. He'd chosen this spot deliberately, the same spot Brenda had confronted him, the same spot where her accusations had echoed, amplified by the shocked silence of the onlookers. He inhaled deeply, the calmness a deliberate effort, a shield against the residual anger that threatened to simmer beneath the surface. He knew this video wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about Brenda. It was about something much larger. He pressed his lips together, a flicker of weariness in his dark eyes. This was about the quiet poison of prejudice, the assumptions that festered beneath the surface of everyday interactions. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady, resonant. His gaze, though directed at the camera lens, seemed to encompass the entire community, the entire nation. He was acutely aware of the invisible audience, the thousands, perhaps millions, who would dissect his every word, every nuance of expression. This video, he knew, held more weight than any press conference, any official statement. He'd refused media requests, opting for this raw, unfiltered communication. "I'm Darius Rowland. You may know me from a video that's been circulating online." He paused, allowing a small, self-deprecating smile to touch his lips. "The one where I'm mistaken for a trespasser in my own community pool." The smile vanished, replaced by an expression of grave seriousness. His internal monologue was a whirlwind of anxieties and hopes. Would he be able to convey the true message? Would his words be twisted, misconstrued? He pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. "I could talk about the specifics of the incident," he continued, his voice a calm counterpoint to the turmoil within him. He imagined Brenda watching this, imagined her defensiveness hardening into justification. He imagined Ty, a silent nod of understanding passing between them. He imagined Haley, the girl who'd filmed it all, her young face a mixture of fear and defiance. He drew strength from these imagined witnesses, each one a thread in the complex tapestry of this unfolding narrative. "I could talk about the embarrassment, the frustration, the sheer absurdity of being questioned in a place I call home. But this isn't about me. This is about a much bigger issue." His fingers tightened around the phone, the cool metal a grounding force. He knew he was walking a tightrope, balancing the need to address the injustice with the need to avoid further division. "This is about the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, often unconsciously," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as if confiding a secret. The rustling of leaves in a nearby tree suddenly seemed amplified, a subtle backdrop to the weight of his words. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, gathering his thoughts, his emotions. This was the crux of it, the message he needed to convey. "Before we react, before we judge, before we call security on someone who looks different, who doesn't fit our preconceived notions of belonging, I ask you, I implore you to pause. To question. He opened his eyes, his gaze direct, piercing. He saw not the camera lens, but the faces of his community, the faces of a nation grappling with its own deeply embedded prejudices. Ask yourself, what are my assumptions based on? Are they rooted in fact or fear? Are they a reflection of reality or a projection of my own internal biases? He knew these questions were uncomfortable, challenging. He knew they would likely spark defensiveness in some, denial in others. But they were questions that needed to be asked, questions that had to be wrestled with. He thought of the countless times he'd been subjected to these unspoken assumptions, the weight of them accumulating like invisible stones in his pockets. The casual glances, the hesitant smiles, the subtle distancing. He'd learned to carry the weight, to navigate the minefield of microaggressions. But he refused to let this incident be just another stone added to the burden. Understanding begins with questioning, he continued, his voice gaining strength, conviction replacing the earlier weariness. The sun, now higher in the sky, cast long shadows across the pool deck. He felt a shift in the air, a subtle change in the atmosphere, as if the very environment was holding its breath, listening. It begins with acknowledging that we all have biases, that we all see the world through the lens of our own experiences. And it's only by acknowledging these biases that we can begin to dismantle them. He took a deep breath, the chlorine scent no longer sharp, but almost comforting in its familiarity. This incident, as uncomfortable as it was, has given us an opportunity, he said, his voice resonating with a quiet hope. He looked beyond the camera, beyond the pool, beyond the confines of his community. He saw a ripple effect, the power of one small incident to spark a larger conversation, an opportunity to reflect, to learn, to grow. Let's not waste it. He paused, the silence hanging heavy in the air, filled with unspoken emotions, unanswered questions. Then, with a final steady gaze into the lens, he said, "Thank you." He pressed the stop button, the red light vanishing. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle lapping of the water against the edge of the pool. He stood there for a moment, the phone still in his hand, feeling the weight of the moment, the weight of the message he'd just sent out into the world. He didn't know what the reaction would be. He didn't know if his words would make a difference. But he knew he had to try. He had to use this platform, this unwanted spotlight, to shine a light on the darkness, to spark a conversation that desperately needed to be had. He exhaled slowly, a long, steady release of tension. He turned and walked away from the pool, leaving the shimmering turquoise surface to reflect the clear, bright sky. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Darius's meticulously manicured lawn, the emerald green a stark contrast to the churning gray storm brewing inside him. He sat on his back porch, the rhythmic creak of the swing a counterpoint to the disquiet in his mind. Even here, in the supposed sanctuary of his home, the incident at the pool clung to him like a second skin. He'd replayed the scene countless times, each iteration a fresh sting. Brenda's accusatory tone, her unwavering certainty that he didn't belong. He closed his eyes, picturing her face contorted by prejudice, the words venomous, yet delivered with an air of casual entitlement. Why? He wondered, the question a dull ache behind his temples. Why did she see a threat where there was none? The quiet hum of his phone vibrated against the wooden table beside him. He opened his eyes, a flicker of apprehension in their depths. The past few days had been a whirlwind. The video, taken by that quick-thinking teenager, had spread like wildfire. News outlets, social media, everyone had an opinion. He'd received countless calls, some supportive, some hostile, all adding to the weight he already carried. He picked up the phone, the cool glass a stark contrast to the heat gathering in his chest. It was an email. The subject line read simply, "Tulsa." Darius hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. He knew what it was, another ripple in the ever-expanding pond of public reaction. He tapped the screen, his breath catching in his throat as he began to read. "Chief Roland," the email began, the words stark against the bright white background. "My name is Sarah Miller, and I'm writing to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I saw the video. I saw you standing there, calm and composed, in the face of such blatant disrespect. Darius paused, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He'd read dozens of emails like this, each echoing the same sentiment. Yet this one felt different. He continued reading. I saw my brother in you, Sarah wrote, her words a punch to his gut. I saw the way he's treated every day, the suspicion in people's eyes, the assumption that he's dangerous simply because of the color of his skin. Darius's hand tightened around the phone, his knuckles whitening. He'd lived this reality his entire life. The constant awareness of being judged, the burden of representing an entire race in every interaction. I saw my husband in you. The email continued, the words blurring slightly as Darius blinked back a sudden surge of emotion. The way he carries himself with dignity, even when faced with ignorance and prejudice. The way he tries to protect our children from the ugliness of the world. Darius exhaled slowly, the air heavy with unspoken truths. He thought of his own children, the conversations he'd had with them about how to navigate a world that often saw them as a threat. The tightrope walk between asserting their rights and ensuring their safety. And I saw my son in you, Sarah concluded, the final sentence hanging in the air like a silent plea. The fear in his eyes when he sees the news, the questions he asks about why people hate him for who he is. The weight of the world he carries on his young shoulders. Darius closed his eyes, the words echoing in the chambers of his heart. He felt a profound sadness, a shared grief for the collective trauma inflicted on generations of black men and women. He sat there for a long time, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the darkness swirling within him. The email from Tulsa was a turning point. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every black person who had ever been unjustly profiled, every family that had lived with the constant fear of prejudice, every child who had been forced to bear the weight of societal biases. The incident at the pool had become a symbol, a microcosm of a larger issue that plagued the nation. He opened his eyes, the last rays of sunlight warming his face. The anger, the frustration, it was still there, a simmering ember beneath the surface. But something else had emerged, a sense of purpose, a renewed commitment to fighting for change. He wasn't just a police chief anymore. He was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the strength of a community determined to rise above prejudice. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree in his backyard, a soothing whisper in the gathering dusk. He thought of Sarah Miller in Tulsa, her words a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. He thought of all the others who saw themselves, their families, their loved ones in his experience. He took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. The battle was far from over, but he was ready. He had to be, for himself, for his family, for everyone who had ever been judged by the color of their skin. The muted chime of his phone resonated in the quiet of his living room, a stark contrast to the cacophony that had erupted in his life just hours before. Darius reached for it, the cool glass a stark contrast against his still warm skin. His sister's name shimmered on the screen. None. A flicker of apprehension tightened his chest. He knew this call wasn't about catching up. He knew it was about the video. The video that had transformed a quiet afternoon at the community pool into a national debate. He swiped to answer, bracing himself. Darius. Nunn's voice was tight, laced with a nervous energy that mirrored his own internal turmoil. None, he replied, his voice betraying none of the exhaustion that weighed heavy on his soul. A beat of silence hung between them, heavy and charged. He could almost hear her trying to formulate the words, trying to navigate the delicate terrain of their shared history, their shared blackness in a world that constantly reminded them they were other. He pictured her in her apartment, probably pacing, a hand nervously twisting a strand of her long braids, just like she used to when they were kids, and she was about to confess to some minor mischief. "You didn't tell me you were going to break the internet," she finally said, a hint of strained humor in her voice. It was a deflection, a way to avoid the raw, uncomfortable truth of the situation. He recognized it, understood it. It was their family's default setting, humor as a shield against the sharp edges of the world. He exhaled slowly, the tension slowly seeping out of his shoulders. I had no such plans, believe me. He ran a hand over his face, the fatigue settling in with renewed intensity. Another silence, this one filled with unspoken understanding. He knew she was processing, replaying the video in her mind, seeing him standing there, calm and composed while a woman berated him for existing in a space she deemed not meant for him. He knew she was feeling it too, that visceral sting of injustice, the familiar weight of being judged based on the color of his skin. They never see us as normal, and then finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The dam had broken, the carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of a shared experience. He closed his eyes, the words echoing the unspoken fears that haunted his own thoughts. Normal, he repeated softly, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. What was normal anyway? Was it the carefree laughter of the children splashing in the pool, oblivious to the undercurrents of prejudice that swirled beneath the surface? Was it the casual greetings exchanged between neighbors, veiled with unspoken assumptions and judgments? Was it the way Brenda, the woman in the video, had looked at him, her eyes filled with suspicion and fear, as if he were a threat simply by virtue of his presence? The silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft hum of the air conditioner. He could almost feel the miles separating them melt away, leaving only the raw, shared experience of being black in America. He could almost see her face, the pain and frustration etched in her features. He wished he could tell her it would be okay, that things would change. But the words felt hollow, empty promises in the face of a reality that had been etched in their bones since childhood. Instead, he simply listened, the silence a testament to the depth of their shared understanding. He thought back to the incident, the woman's accusatory tone, the casual racism disguised as concern for community safety. He remembered the tightening in his chest, the controlled fury that threatened to erupt. He had chosen composure, not weakness. He had chosen to represent his position, his community, with dignity. But the cost of that composure was a heavy weight he now carried alone. It's just tiring, Darius. Nunn's voice broke the silence, laced with weariness. Always having to prove ourselves, always having to be twice as good, just to be seen as half as capable. He knew it deep in his bones. The constant pressure, the ever-present awareness of being judged, scrutinized, measured against a standard that was constantly shifting, always just out of reach. The exhaustion that seeped into every aspect of their lives, a constant hum beneath the surface of their everyday interactions. I know, he whispered, the words inadequate, insufficient to capture the depth of the weariness that had settled in his soul. He wished he could offer her more, some glimmer of hope, some assurance that things would get better. But the truth was, he wasn't sure they would. Not yet. But Nunn's voice took on a new strength, a flicker of defiance. We keep going. We keep fighting. We keep showing them who we are. He felt a surge of pride, a warmth that spread through his chest, pushing back against the weariness. His sister, his rock, his constant reminder of the resilience that ran through their veins, a legacy passed down through generations of struggle and triumph. He opened his eyes, the image of the pool shimmering in his memory, the sunlight glinting off the water, the laughter of the children, the shadow of the woman's accusation. He saw it all now, not just the incident itself, but the context, the history, the weight of centuries of prejudice and injustice. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep within him, that this was not just about him. It was about them, about all the black men and women who had been unfairly judged, profiled, and marginalized. It was about the fight for equality, for recognition, for the simple right to exist without fear, without suspicion, without having to constantly prove their worth. He took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs. He was tired, yes, but he was not broken. He was not defeated. He was Darius Rowland, chief of police, and he would keep fighting. For himself, for his sister, for his community, for the future. The rhythmic creak of the porch swing was a familiar comfort, a gentle counterpoint to the disquiet that still lingered within him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his backyard, painting the lawn in hues of fading gold. Darius closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass, trying to ground himself in the familiar. The incident at the pool, the raw sting of Brenda's accusations, replayed in his mind like a broken record. He'd faced far worse in his years on the force, situations that had tested his mettle far more acutely. Yet this felt different. It was the casualness of the prejudice, the assumption of his guilt simply based on the color of his skin, that had burrowed under his skin. He'd felt exposed, not as the chief of police, but simply as a black man in a world that too often saw him as a threat. He could still feel the weight of the stares, hear the hushed whispers, the silent judgment that hung in the air thicker than the chlorine fumes from the pool. He'd maintained his composure, reminding himself that his uniform, his position, demanded it. But underneath, the frustration simmered a low, steady burn. A buzzing from his phone broke through the silence. He almost ignored it, a deep part of him craving solitude, a chance to process the turbulent emotions churning within. But duty called. He glanced at the screen. City Hall. He sighed, a slow exhale that carried the weight of the day. He swiped to answer. Chief Rowland, he answered, his voice betraying none of the inner turmoil. Darius, it's Mayor Thompson. I just saw the video. The mayor's voice was low, laced with a mixture of disbelief and shame. Darius closed his eyes again, the image of Haley's phone pointed at him, flashing behind his eyelids. He hadn't even noticed her filming, too focused on de-escalating the situation. The speed at which it had spread was unsettling, a testament to the power of social media. Yes, sir, Darius replied, his voice neutral. He wondered what the mayor was thinking, what words he was searching for. He could picture Thompson's office, the mahogany desk gleaming under the soft glow of a desk lamp, the framed cityscape hanging on the wall. A stark contrast to the harsh reality of the poolside confrontation. It's appalling, Thompson finally said, the word hanging heavy in the air between them. I've already spoken with the city council. We're drafting a statement condemning this blatant act of prejudice. Darius listened, the rhythmic creaking of the swing a subtle backdrop to the mayor's words. He knew statements were necessary, the official pronouncements of condemnation, the promises of investigation. But he also knew they weren't enough. What truly mattered was the change that followed, the difficult conversations, the dismantling of ingrained biases. We need to do more than just condemn it, Darius, the mayor continued, his voice gaining a new firmness. We need to use this as a catalyst, a chance to truly address the systemic issues that allow incidents like this to happen. Darius felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, something good could come from this. Perhaps this uncomfortable spotlight could illuminate the dark corners, the hidden prejudices that festered beneath the surface of their community. I agree, sir, he replied, his voice carrying a newfound conviction. He thought about the officers under his command, the diverse community they served, the trust that needed to be rebuilt, strengthened. I want to hold a town hall, Darius, Thompson said. A chance for the community to come together, to have an open and honest dialogue about race, about bias, about how we can move forward. Darius nodded, though he knew the mayor couldn't see him. The idea felt right, a way to channel the anger and frustration into something productive. He imagined the faces in the crowd, the voices raised in debate, the uncomfortable truths that would need to be confronted. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. I think that's a good idea, sir, he said, a sense of purpose settling over him. He could almost see the ripples spreading outward, the conversation extending beyond the confines of their city, prompting a much-needed national reflection. I want you to lead it, Darius, Thompson said, his voice carrying a weight of trust. You're the right person to guide this conversation. You embody the strength, the integrity, the understanding we need right now. Darius felt a surge of emotion, a complex mix of pride, responsibility, and a deep weariness. He knew the road ahead would be long and arduous. He knew he would face criticism, skepticism, even hostility. But he also knew he couldn't shy away from the challenge. He had a duty to his community, to his officers, to himself, to ensure that something positive emerged from this painful experience. "I won't let you down, sir," he said, his voice firm, resolute. He looked out at his backyard, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was still pregnant with the promise of change. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since the incident, Darius felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that even in the darkest of moments, light could emerge. He knew the conversation was just beginning, a long, difficult conversation that needed to be had, and he was ready to lead it.